But as a historian, when you look at the situation now that we are in this country, we've just had the election in America with Trump, and you look at Britain, would you say that Britain's perceived decline is absolutely unstoppable?
Well, actually, that's a really interesting question, because I was asked the very same question by the chargé d'affaires of one of our leading allies, let's just say that, within the last week.
Really?
And he actually said to me, is Britain's decline stoppable?
Yeah.
And he also said that in his mind, and he was an Anglophile, in his mind, Britain was becoming a museum.
Right.
I think there are fundamental problems. I think one of the fundamental problems is a state can only do well if its economy is functioning. If you load the economy with a myriad of other policies, social policies, cultural policies, then you run the risk of making it uneconomic. And as we know, once you have a non-performing economy, or a poorly performing economy, or an economy in which there are one or two good sectors, but a lot of it isn't doing well, then the decline can be very rapid. I mean, a good example of that is Argentina. Argentina in 1910 was one of the more successful countries in the world. Argentina by 1950 was a basket case.
Right.
And the danger is we might go the same way, and I don't think people have really understood that.
Is it purely an economic thing, though? You see, because it seems...
No, so it's certainly not purely an economic thing. But the point I would bring up is that the economy is one of the fundamental aspects. Now, many of the problems for the economy arise from social and cultural issues.
Right.
So, for example, in Britain, I would suggest the role of the state is too big. There is a very poorly operating state. And I have to say, this has been the case under the present government, Labour government. It wasn't exactly as though the Conservative predecessors did brilliantly under that. There's been a poorly performing state taking too large a percentage of national resources. And that, of course, the taxation has to come from somewhere for that. That presses on the productive economy. So I think that there is a major problem there. And I think there's also issues of cultural cohesion, because if a society is in, I would say, both absolute and relative decline, but if it is in decline, and you can debate the rate of decline, clearly the way that that is coped with by people, communities, families, the country as a whole, reflects cultural cohesion or its absence. Now, you can see this in all sorts of different ways. One of the more interesting ways at the moment is the extent to which talented young people are leaving in order to pursue careers in places like Australia. Every single loss of a talented young individual or family is a problem for the country. No two ways about it. I mean, obviously, we are having large tranches of immigration, and some immigrants perform very valuable functions and integrate into society, but many do not. And, there are practical problems in that respect. Another aspect that is very important to the operation of society and the economy as a whole is belief in the rule of law, belief in law and order. Now, clearly, it's not just that there are the economic costs, there are the strains on social and cultural cohesion. If criminality is rising, if on basic level, for example, something well reported over the last 3 months, the enormously high rate of shoplifting that is going on. Every single firm that is losing X million pounds for shoplifting, it affects their profitability, it affects the tax yield. It is not a good thing. And yet you will find commentators out there suggesting it's not serious, that it's a kind of counterculture, whatever they want to say. So no, there are many problems in the socio-cultural and political spheres that directly feed into economic problems.
But do you think that, do you think we could even call ourselves a socially cohesive society at the moment?
No, well, I wouldn't say let's put it like this. There are always in every society differences of opinion. That's a good thing. there are differences of practice. That's a good thing. Whether people listening to this are conservatives or on the left, I think most people who are, shall we say, Democrats, accept that others of different views have a legitimate position. I mean, it's only one or two rather odd MPs that would say they'd never go out with a Tory or something like that. But most people would accept that. There are some people who would hate it if their daughter-in-law or son-in-law was of a different political or ethnic affiliation. Others won't. What I'm talking about is in part a decline in social cohesion because that very democratic tolerance seems to be ebbing.
Yeah.
And there's also linked to that the notion of what is called direct action. The idea that in some way one's own opinions are sufficiently valid that you can use any method in order to stop people. So we could have the farcical situation that the southern stretch of the M25 is closed by pro-abortion people sitting down and the top stretch by anti-abortion people sitting down in the road. But the net effect of it is to sap confidence in legal processes. I think also that the argument that you cannot say something because others may find it disagreeable is one that does affect social cohesion because it's an important aspect of any society, whether the society is your family, your immediate neighbours, or society as a whole, however defined, that you should be able to have an opinion. And a lot of people feel very, very upset if they don't feel that they can express their opinion.
It's interesting because what you say there, because it seems to me that Britain was once, which is all part of cohesion, a very high trust society.
Yeah.
There's a very high trust, great deal of agreement about certain things, and trust in one's neighbours, peers. That seems to have really ebbed, actually, to the point where I'm not even sure you could call this a high trust society anymore.
Well, I think you're right, and it's it's the absence of trust, not simply in the levels that we're thinking about. Is what if you leave a briefcase there, will somebody by accident or somebody steal it, or do you have to keep your eye on your suitcase on the train all the time because there are people? It's not just those kind of illegalities. There is also trust in a broader sense. If you arrange for a few people, neighbours or whatever, to come round for, let's say, dinner or lunch or drinks, are they likely to row with each other because somebody there is not prepared to have somebody else say X, Y, or Z? And I think that is what, and that might sound trivial to listeners. Actually, it isn't trivial because the ability to socialize with people in your own community is an important aspect of the building blocks of society.
Yeah, it is. Now, I was thinking also, similarly, the kind of disintegration of what I would call peer pressure. But so, for example, on a train journey or whatever, sort of bad behavior, maybe once, or antisocial behavior, once people would have frowned on it, maybe looked to each other to have sort of like condemn it. I think that seems to have entirely disappeared, or maybe it's because I'm going to and fro to London, and it's different in London.
Well, it's certainly a problem in London. I mean, just as a minor point, I'm a Londoner by origin. I've written the history of London twice, actually. Just as a minor point, I mean, those people, on the tubes, it actually says on some of the seats, do please give this seat up if somebody is elderly or pregnant. And, that often just doesn't happen. And, you have to be very careful to whom you wish to say things to because of the danger they might stick a knife in you.
So quite. In other words, we're ruled now by fear as opposed to sort of embarrassment or shame. It's pure fear.
Yes, I fear that is the case.
Yeah.
Now, does that vary in different parts of the country? I think it does. I mean, obviously, we always have problems with statistics. Any historian will tell you that there is always the problem of our statistics equally assessed. But I think there's no doubt that there is a sense of that some areas are more dangerous than others. And interestingly enough, this feeds through to population movements within the country.
Yeah.
I mean, I live in Devon. Devon is affected at the present moment by very rapid population rise. Now, interestingly, which is immigration into the county. Interestingly enough, that's
Long way, by the way.
Well, this is it. We're not talking about from outside the country.
No, yeah.
We're talking about people moving from, say, Redbridge or Harrow boroughs in London, or from cities like Birmingham, Wolverhampton, Leicester, because they don't feel comfortable there, whatever that means.
Yeah.
And so I think you've got a volatility that you can see in different parts of the country. And you know, obviously the problem is when you make any comments, you know, I published a book with, in fact, an American university press, Indiana, on Britain since 1945, and it's recently gone through a second edition. And actually, I did mention the grooming gangs scandal in Rotherham, and more generally, it wasn't just there, of course. And obviously, one is aware of the situation that if you say certain things, people will accuse you of this, that, and the other. Let us be clear about this. Just as well understood, the majority of people that are unfortunate do not commit crime. The majority of people who are immigrants into this country wish to do better for them and their families. That doesn't mean you should just allow in anybody that wants, but you know that but the problem is that there are particular areas and groups that are a difficulty and that do have particular higher rates of things not going well for them, which are problems for the rest of society. And if one comments on that, people get askance. Well, we shouldn't be askance. So, for example, cousin marriage is a problem in any community. It doesn't matter whether the people are of whatever colour or whatever religion. It is a problem. People ought to be aware of that. You are not per se making an aggressive comment if, when asked about that, you say something.
But the fact is that because of the atmosphere in which we live, people don't address it, you know, cousin marriage, for example, or they don't criticize it. There's this fear somehow of making a moral judgment.
Well, I think partly it's, of course, fear for one's own job.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were let's say you were a sociologist and you were asked to give a course of lectures on modern society, and you were giving a lecture on family structures, I don't think you would find it easy, because what would happen, of course, is you'd have, if you're not careful, a student would complain that this was whatever they chose to define
Racist or
whatever, or just unpleasant from their point of view, and wow, your career's ended, you're toast. So I think that there is a degree of uneasy. I mean, what is ironic, of course, is if you look back over the last quarter century, a set of comments and views have been criminalized. You know, they've actually now. So I think it's essentially on ethnicity, gender, sexual preference, and religion. You know, and people will have their own.
They all protected characteristics.
Yeah, they'll have their own views on that, and absolutely, you know, this is a democratic society. You can take that up with your MPs and all the rest of it. It's not my job as a commentator to say this is outrageous, though as a libertarian, I actually think it's not a good thing. But it's odd that you could say something like, you know, if you were to make comments on any of those, you'd be in dead trouble. You could have said in 2008-9, kill all the bankers as a result of the financial crisis.
Yes.
Or you could say, you know, I wouldn't sit down for dinner with a Tory.
Yes.
As several, and my God, you're allowed to get away with that.
Yes.
Now, my own view is none of these should be protected characteristics.
Yeah.
We should live in a society which differentiates between things that are said, however abhorrent abhorrent, and some of them are greatly abhorrent, Holocaust denial, for example. Some of them are greatly abhorrent, but we should distinguish between those and actions which actually hurt other people. That's a different matter. So, for example, and if you lessen that distinction by making all comments a matter of, potentially a large range of comments, a matter of criminal offence, then you actually, in a way, diminish the severity as well as actually the police resources that can deal with actions that are really unpleasant. You know, some thug beating up somebody of a different ethnic group, some old lady or some young man who they don't like on that basis. That's wrong. It should be stopped. Those people should be imprisoned. It doesn't matter what colour they are. Yeah. They should be imprisoned. But if somebody's, you know, drunk, says some abusive remark,
yes,
you know, well, they're a boorish person. That's it. There are boorish people in society. Grow up.